All right, welcome everyone. Today we are diving deep into what was, without a doubt, one of the most chaotic and transformative decades in Pakistan's history. We're talking about the years 1968 to 1978. Now, especially for those of you studying for your O-level Pakistan studies, getting a grip on this period is absolutely crucial. I mean, think about it. This is the decade where Pakistan literally lost half the country, dabbled in socialism, and watched democracy make a comeback only to be snatched away, again, by a military dictatorship. These events didn't just redraw the map, they completely reshaped the very soul of the nation.
So how are we going to unpack this whole whirlwind of a story? Well, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the downfall of President Ayub Khan. You know, his famous decade of development that ended in massive protests. Then we'll have to tackle the incredibly painful 1971 war that split the country apart. Out of that crisis, we'll see the rise of the charismatic Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and his vision for the people. And finally, we'll wrap up with the military coup that brought General Zia-ul-Haq into power, pushing Pakistan in a totally different direction. So let's jump right in.
Okay, so our story kicks off with the end of a major era, the rule of Ayub Khan. By 1968, he'd been in charge for a solid 10 years, a time everyone was calling the decade of development. And you know, from the outside, things looked pretty good. Pakistan seemed stable, it was modernizing. But that was just the surface. Underneath all that polish, some serious cracks were starting to form, and they were about to break everything wide open.
And this timeline right here really shows you just how fast a powerful government can fall apart. I mean, look at this. The first real sign of trouble was in 1966 when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Ayub's own foreign minister, resigned. That was a big deal. By 1968, that little crack had turned into a massive canyon of street protests. And then boom, just 1 year later, 1969, Ayub Khan is out. Gone. It was an incredibly fast and stunning collapse.
So the big question is, what caused this? Why did it all fall apart? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was more like a perfect storm of problems, all hitting at once. People were really unhappy with the 1962 Constitution, which gave the president, Ayub Khan, way too much power. Then there was his basic democracy system, which sounds nice, but most people saw it as a way for him to control politics, not to actually give them a voice. On the economic front, there was this growing feeling that all this development was just making a few rich families even richer. And to top it all off, the 1965 war with India, it ended in a draw. And that really damaged Ayub Khan's reputation as the strong, unbeatable military leader.
Now, you'd think Ayub Khan leaving would bring some calm, right? Nope. It did the exact opposite. It created this dangerous power vacuum. The guy who took over, General Yahya Khan, decided to do something huge, hold the country's first ever general elections. And this was meant to be the answer to everyone's prayers, the solution to the political crisis. But instead, it turned out to be the very thing that lit the fuse on a bomb that would blow the country in two.
And this is really the central question, the big puzzle of this whole period. How on earth did a democratic election, Pakistan's first proper election where every adult had a vote, lead directly to a civil war? I mean, this should have been a moment of celebration, right? A huge win for democracy. But instead, it triggered a conflict that ripped the country apart. So what went so wrong? Well, the answer is sitting right here in these election results. This table tells you everything you need to know. You see Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League? They won a massive majority, more than enough seats to form the government all by themselves. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. Every single one of their 160 seats was won in East Pakistan. They got zero, absolutely nothing in the West. And on the flip side, Bhutto's PPP dominated West Pakistan, but had zero presence in the East. This wasn't one country voting. It was like two different countries holding two separate elections. It created a complete political and geographical stalemate. And nobody could break that deadlock. The politicians just couldn't agree on how to share power. So the military decided to act. They launched Operation Searchlight in East Pakistan, basically to crush the growing Bengali nationalist movement. But this incredibly harsh crackdown totally backfired. It pushed East Pakistani leaders to declare independence, creating Bangladesh. From there, things just spiraled. India got involved, supporting the Bengali forces, and it turned into a full-blown, unwinnable war for Pakistan. The whole thing ended tragically with the surrender of the Pakistani army in Dhaka in December 1971. So after all that, Pakistan was just a broken country, totally reeling from the shock of defeat and the trauma of being split in two. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was now the president, had to pick up the pieces.
One of the first and most important things he did was meet with India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in a place called Simla. The agreement they signed there, the Simla Accord, was a huge deal. Yeah, it officially ended the war, but the really crucial part for a completely demoralized Pakistan was that it arranged for the return of more than 90,000 prisoners of war. That was a massive step toward healing.
So now we have a new chapter. East Pakistan is gone, and a smaller, pretty shaken Pakistan is now being led by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And what a figure he was. He was an incredible speaker, super charismatic, a real populist, but also someone who people either loved or hated. He stepped onto the stage promising to build a new Pakistan, right from the ashes of the old one.
You know, if you ask what Bhutto's single biggest achievement was, many people would point to the 1973 Constitution. I mean, think about it. After decades of constitutional messes and military takeovers, he somehow managed to get all the political parties, even his rivals, to agree on one single document. That was incredible. It created a parliamentary democracy, and even though it's been suspended a few times over the years, it's still the fundamental legal framework for Pakistan today.
Bhutto's whole political identity was built on this incredibly powerful socialist slogan, Roti, Kapra, or Makan, which means food, clothing, and shelter for every single person. And he wasn't just talking. His government launched this massive wave of reforms. They nationalized huge industries, banks, even schools, putting them all under government control. He brought in reforms for land and labor to give more power to farmers and factory workers. The goal here was huge. It was radical, to completely smash the power of the old elites and build a society that was much more fair.
And this quote really captures the feeling of that moment. You have to understand, for millions and millions of ordinary Pakistanis, Bhutto represented real, genuine hope. He was promising a complete departure from the old way of doing things, from the military-run establishment. He was offering this vision of a new, progressive future that was going to be built for the people, by the people.
But as you might have guessed, this era of civilian rule just wasn't meant to last. Bhutto's style of governing became more and more authoritarian, and he made some very powerful enemies. This led to massive political chaos, and all that chaos, well, it opened the door for Pakistan's third military coup. And the irony is just incredible. It was led by the very army chief that Bhutto himself had chosen, General Zia-ul-Haq. So where did it go wrong for Bhutto? Well, the main trigger was the 1977 election. The opposition, a big alliance called the PNA, was convinced it was completely rigged. And that claim just lit a fire, sparking protests all over the country. At the same time, his economic policies, especially the nationalization, had really upset the business community and the factory owners, and they weren't really fixing the country's money problems anyway. So that hope he had created, it started turning into anger, and the streets once again filled up with protesters. And this is a tragically familiar story in Pakistan's history, isn't it? The politicians are deadlocked, they can't solve the crisis, the country is tipping into chaos, and the army steps in. On July 5th, 1977, General Zia launched what he called Operation Fair Play. He arrested Bhutto, threw out the government, and imposed martial law. And just like that, for the third time in its short history, Pakistan's democratic experiment was over. Now, it's so important to understand that Zia's coup wasn't just about one guy replacing another. No, this was a complete 180-degree ideological U-turn for the entire country. He immediately kicked off this massive process of Islamization. The goal was to totally reshape Pakistan's laws, its culture, its whole identity along very conservative religious lines. It was a radical break from Bhutto's socialist and more secular vision, and it was a decision that would define Pakistan for the next several decades. So think about it. From the fall of one general to the rise of another, from the absolute trauma of losing East Pakistan to the brief hope of the 1973 Constitution, this decade was just a non-stop roller coaster. So as you're studying all this, keep this big question in your head. What is the real lasting legacy of these 10 years? How do all these chaotic events still ripple through Pakistan's politics today, in its constant struggle for stability, for its identity, and for democracy? We really hope this breakdown helps you make sense of this incredibly complicated but important period. If you'd found it helpful for your revision, do us a huge favor and hit that like button. And definitely subscribe to our channel, Spotwork Learning. We're committed to making more explainers just like this to help you absolutely crush your Pakistan Studies exam. Thanks so much for watching.